You showed up, you worked hard, you stayed consistent, and yet the freedom never came closer. It stayed just out of reach, like a horizon that moves every time you walk toward it. But what if the problem was never your effort? What if the real problem was the formula you were taught to follow? In this audiobook, The Asset Formula That Pays You for Life, you are about to discover a different way to think, a different way to build, a different way to live, not based on chasing income, but on creating systems that generate it, not based on exhaustion, but on leverage, not based on survival, but on ownership. Because here's the truth most people avoid. You don't become free by working harder. You become free by building something that works without you. This audiobook will guide you through 25 chapters, a complete transformation in how you see time, money, energy, and value. You'll learn how to shift from earning to owning, how to turn skills into assets, how to build income streams that don't depend on your presence, how to think like an architect, not a worker, and how to design a life where your effort compounds instead of resets. This is not financial advice. This is not a shortcut. This is a framework, a mental model, a way of seeing the world that changes everything once you understand it. Because the people who escape the cycle are not the ones who hustle more. They're the ones who build differently. And by the end of this audiobook, you won't just understand assets. You'll start seeing them everywhere. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. So take a breath, let your shoulders drop, and prepare to step into a different way of thinking. Because Chapter 1 begins with a realization that might change how you see your entire life. And it starts with a simple question. If you stopped working tomorrow, what would still pay you? To Chapter 1, The Invisible Trap. There is a system most people live inside and never question. It looks normal. It feels responsible. It's even praised. You wake up, you go to work, you get paid, you repeat. Day after day, week after week, year after year, and on the surface, it works. Bills get paid. Life moves forward. But underneath that surface, there is a quiet dependency, a fragile structure, because everything you earn depends on you showing up. Every dollar is tied to your presence. Your time becomes the currency. And once your time is gone, so is your income. That is the invisible trap. And most people don't see it until they feel it. Late at night, early in the morning, in moments of exhaustion where the body keeps moving, but the mind starts asking questions. Is this sustainable? Can I do this forever? Is this really freedom or just a well-organized routine? The truth is simple. If your income depends entirely on your time, you are not in control. You are in a contract, a silent one, where your life energy is exchanged daily just to maintain your position. And there's nothing wrong with working. There's nothing wrong with effort. But there is something dangerous about believing that effort alone will set you free. Because effort without leverage only repeats itself. And this is where everything begins to shift. The moment you stop seeing yourself as the source of income and start seeing yourself as the builder of systems. This idea is echoed again and again in high-performing mindsets. The shift from labor to leverage, from effort to structure. Because systems don't get tired. Systems don't stop. Systems don't need motivation. They run quietly, consistently, relentlessly. And once built, they continue. That is the difference. An employee works once and gets paid once. An asset builder works once and gets paid repeatedly. That difference is everything. Now imagine this. You build something today, a skill turned into a digital product, a piece of content that reaches thousands, a system that delivers value without your presence. And tomorrow, it still works. Next week, it still works. Next year, it still works. That is not magic. That is design. And the people who understand this, they don't chase money. They build engines. Engines that produce value. Engines that create flow. Engines that separate income from time. But here's where most people hesitate. They say, that sounds risky. That sounds uncertain. I need stability. But what if the greatest risk is staying dependent on something that stops the moment you do? What if stability is not found in a paycheck, but in ownership? Because a paycheck can disappear, a job can change, a system can shift. But an asset, if built correctly, continues even when you rest, even when you step away, even when life demands something from you. And that is the beginning of real security. Not control over your time, but freedom from needing to trade it constantly. So the question becomes, why don't more people do this? Why doesn't everyone build assets? Because it requires something most people avoid: delayed reward, uncertainty, effort without immediate validation. It requires you to work without seeing results right away. And in a world addicted to instant feedback, that feels uncomfortable. But that discomfort is the entry point, because everything that compounds starts quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, until one day it doesn't. And that is where chapter 2 begins. Because before you build anything, you need to understand the most powerful concept behind all assets: leverage. And once you understand leverage, you will never look at work the same way again. Dear viewer, we now have over 150 videos on our channel. That's a huge number, and we want to thank you, our viewers and subscribers, so much for that. You inspire us to create great videos every time and choose the best topics for our audiobooks. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to do so. We have big plans for this channel. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Power of Leverage. There is a force in this world that most people use without ever understanding. A quiet multiplier, an invisible amplifier, a principle so powerful that once you truly see it, you will never return to working the same way again. It's called leverage, and everything about your future changes the moment you stop ignoring it. Because leverage is the difference between effort that fades and effort that expands. It is the reason one person can work 10 hours and earn 10 units, while another works the same 10 hours and earns 1,000 again and again. Same time, different outcome. Why? Because one is relying on effort and the other is using leverage. Leverage is not about working more. It's about making what you do work more. It's about building something once and allowing it to produce repeatedly. It's about shifting from motion to multiplication. And when you understand this, you begin to see the world differently. You no longer ask, how can I earn more today? You start asking, how can I build something that earns even when I'm not there? This is the mindset shift that separates survival from strategy. Because the truth is, you don't need more time. You need more output from the time you already have. And leverage is how you create that output. There are 4 primary forms of leverage in the modern world: time, people, capital, and technology. Most people only use one: their own time. And that's why they stay limited, because time does not scale. You have 24 hours. So does everyone else. And once those hours are spent, they're gone. But leverage breaks that limit. Let's start with the most powerful one in today's world, technology. Right now, you are listening to this. Think about that for a moment. This message was created once, but it can be heard by thousands, millions, across different countries, different time zones, different lives. That is leverage, one input, infinite reach. And this is not reserved for a few. This is available to anyone willing to learn how to use it. Content, code, digital products, automated systems. These are not trends. They are tools. Tools that allow your effort to exist beyond the moment you create it. And that changes everything, because now your work doesn't end when you finish. It begins. Then there's leverage through people, not in a manipulative way, but in a collaborative one. Building teams, delegating tasks, creating structures where others contribute to a shared outcome. This is how businesses grow, not by one person doing everything, but by systems of contribution working together. And then there is capital, money used not for consumption, but for creation, invested into assets, into ideas, into systems that produce more than they consume. And finally, time itself, not in how much you have, but how you use it, because one focused hour can be more valuable than 10 distracted ones. This idea appears again and again in high-performance thinking, that a small intentional block of time can shift everything when used correctly. And that's where leverage begins, not in complexity, but in clarity, in choosing to use your time to build something that lasts, instead of something that disappears. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. Leverage requires patience, because in the beginning, it looks like nothing is happening. You create something, and no one sees it. You build something, and no one uses it. You invest time, and nothing comes back immediately. And that's where most people stop, because they've been trained to expect instant results. Work, get paid, repeat. But leverage doesn't work like that. Leverage compounds, slowly, quietly, until it doesn't. And then everything changes. This is why consistency becomes your greatest advantage, not intensity, not bursts of motivation, but steady, repeated action. Because every small effort adds another layer, another brick, another piece of the system, until one day it stands on its own and begins to produce, without you pushing it, without you forcing it, without you being there every moment. That's when you realize you didn't just work, you built, and building is different. Building requires vision. It requires discipline. It requires the ability to continue even when there is no immediate reward. But the reward, when it comes, is not temporary. It doesn't reset every day, it grows. And this is where most people underestimate themselves. They think they need something extraordinary to begin. More money, more knowledge, more connections. But the truth is, you already have something valuable: your skills, your experiences, your perspective, the way you think, the way you solve problems. All of that can be turned into an asset, but only if you choose to use it that way. Because a skill that is used once is income. A skill that is turned into a system is an asset. And that distinction is everything. So ask yourself, what are you doing right now that could be turned into something repeatable? What knowledge do you have that others would benefit from? What problem have you solved that someone else is still struggling with? Because hidden inside those answers is your first asset, Not perfect, not massive, but real. And once you build one, you begin to understand the process. You begin to trust it. You begin to see opportunities where you once saw limitations. And that's when things accelerate. Because now you're not guessing. You're building with intention, with awareness, with direction. And that leads us to the next step. Because understanding leverage is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when you change the way you see yourself. Not as a worker, not as an employee, but as an architect, a designer of systems, a builder of assets. And in Chapter 3, we break down exactly what that identity looks like. Because once you become the architect, you stop asking for opportunities and start creating them. Chapter 3, The Architect Mindset. There comes a moment, quiet, subtle, almost invisible, but once it happens, you never go back. It's the moment you stop asking, "What should I do to earn money today?" and start asking, "What can I build that continues tomorrow?" That moment is where you stop being a participant and become a creator, an architect, because workers complete tasks. Architects design systems, and the difference between those two identities is the difference between effort that ends and effort that multiplies. Most people are trained to execute, follow instructions, complete assignments, meet expectations, and there is nothing wrong with that. But if that is all you ever do, you will always be limited by the system you're inside, because execution without ownership creates dependency, and dependency limits freedom. But the architect thinks differently. The architect doesn't just ask how something works, they ask why it exists. They don't just complete the process. They study the structure. They look at everything through one lens. Can this run without me? And if the answer is no, they redesign it. This is the shift. The internal upgrade from doing to designing, from reacting to constructing. And it starts with awareness. Look at your current life, your job, your habits, your income, your routines. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of this continues if I step away? Not someday, not hypothetically, right now. If you paused for 30 days, what would still function? What would still produce? What would still move forward? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable because everything stops. And that realization is not meant to discourage you. It's meant to wake you up. Because once you see it, you have a choice. Stay inside that structure or start building something different. And building something different requires a new identity, the architect identity. The architect understands one thing deeply. Value is not in effort. Value is in what continues after the effort. Let that sink in, because that idea alone can change your entire direction. Think about a simple example. Two people spend 5 hours working. One gets paid once, the other creates something that pays repeatedly. Same time, different design. That's not luck, that's perspective. And perspective can be trained. This is where discipline becomes essential. Not the kind that forces you to work harder, but the kind that forces you to think deeper. Because designing systems requires clarity, focus, and the ability to delay gratification. You won't always see immediate results. You won't always feel progress. But you will be building something that eventually doesn't need your constant presence. And that's worth it. Now, here's something important. Becoming an architect does not mean quitting your current life. It doesn't mean walking away from your job. It means changing how you use your time, even if it's just 1 hour a day. one focused hour, dedicated not to maintaining your life, but to building your future. This idea is simple, but powerful, because consistency in small focused windows creates massive long-term change. That 1 hour becomes your construction zone, your lab, your foundation, and what you build there doesn't disappear at the end of the day. It stacks, layer by layer, day by day, until something begins to form, something real, something that works. Even when you're not actively pushing it, that is when you know you've crossed the line, from worker to architect. But here's where most people struggle. They wait for perfect clarity before starting. They want the full blueprint, the guaranteed outcome, the certainty. But architects don't begin with certainty. They begin with direction. They sketch, they test, they adjust, they refine. And over time, the structure becomes clearer, stronger, more stable. So if you're waiting, stop. You don't need everything figured out. You need to begin with what you know, with what you have, with what you can build today. Because clarity comes from movement, not from thinking alone. And the longer you stay still, the harder it becomes to start. So start small, start simple, but start intentionally. Because every system, every asset, every structure that produces value started as an idea. A rough one, an imperfect one, but one that was acted on. And here's something most people overlook. Your environment will not always support this shift. People may not understand. They may question you, doubt you, even discourage you, because you're stepping outside the normal pattern. You're choosing to build instead of just maintain. And that can feel unfamiliar to those who are still inside the cycle. But remember this, you are not building for approval. You are building for freedom. And freedom often requires silence, focus, and consistency without validation. This is echoed in many high-performance philosophies, that real progress often happens quietly, without external recognition. So don't announce everything. Don't explain every step. Just build quietly, consistently, relentlessly. Let the results speak later, because they will, if you stay with it, if you commit to the process, if you keep showing up, even when no one is watching. Because that's where real builders are formed, in the quiet, in the repetition, in the discipline of doing what matters, even when it doesn't feel exciting. And once you build your first real asset, something shifts again. You gain proof, confidence, momentum. You stop wondering if it works, because now you've seen it work. And that leads to the next level, because once you think like an architect, you begin to see opportunities everywhere. Problems become ideas, skills become tools, time becomes investment. And in Chapter 4, we take this even deeper, because now that you understand the mindset, it's time to break down the raw materials. What exactly makes something an asset? What separates a true asset from something that just looks like one? Because not everything that generates money creates freedom, and that distinction will save you years of wasted effort. Chapter 4. What actually is an asset? The word gets used everywhere. Asset. It sounds powerful, important, almost mysterious, but most people don't actually understand what it means. And because of that, they spend years chasing things that look valuable, but don't truly set them free. So let's make this simple, clear, unmistakable. An asset is not just something that makes money. An asset is something that continues to produce value without requiring your constant presence. That's the line. That's the filter. That's the truth. Because there are many ways to make money, but very few ways to build freedom. And if you don't understand the difference, you will confuse activity with progress. Now think about this. If you earn money from something, but the moment you stop, the money stops too, that is not an asset. That is a transaction. And transactions expire. They reset. They depend on your continued effort, but assets continue. They extend your effort into the future. They take what you've done once and allow it to work repeatedly. This idea is echoed in many wealth-building frameworks, that real financial independence begins when income is no longer tied directly to your time. So now the question becomes, what kinds of things qualify as real assets? Let's break it down. A digital product that sells while you sleep. That's an asset. A piece of content that continues to attract attention and generate value over time. That's an asset. A business system that runs without your daily involvement. That's an asset. Investments that produce returns without you actively managing them every hour. That's an asset. But here's where it gets deeper. Assets are not just external. They can also be internal. Your skills, your mindset, your ability to think clearly under pressure, your discipline, these are foundational assets because they allow you to create external ones. If your thinking is scattered, your systems will be weak. If your discipline is inconsistent, your assets will never fully form. That's why the process always starts within, because what you build outside is a reflection of what you've built inside. And that's where most people underestimate the journey. They think assets are just about money, but in reality, they're about structure, consistency, and clarity. Now, here's a critical distinction. Not all income streams are assets. Some are just disguised effort. They look scalable, but they still depend on you being present. You answer messages, you deliver services, you trade time in a different format. And while that can be a step forward, it's not the final destination, because true assets remove your constant involvement. They allow you to step back without everything collapsing. And this is where you must be honest with yourself. Look at what you're building right now. Ask yourself, does this continue if I stop? Not partially, not temporarily, but consistently. If the answer is no, then you're still in the process of building, and that's okay, because every asset starts as effort. But the goal is to transition that effort into something autonomous, something that runs, something that produces, something that exists beyond your daily input. And this transition is where patience becomes everything, because in the beginning, nothing feels like an asset. It feels like work, slow, uncertain, sometimes frustrating. You put in time, and nothing comes back immediately. And this is where most people quit, because they've been trained to expect quick returns. But assets don't reward speed. They reward consistency. They reward persistence. They reward those who stay long enough for the system to take over. And once it does, everything changes. Because now, you're no longer pushing every outcome. You're guiding it, adjusting it, optimizing it, but not carrying it entirely on your own. That's the shift, from force to flow, from effort to output. And once you experience that even once, you begin to understand something powerful. You realize that freedom is not about escaping work. It's about changing the nature of it, from constant labor to strategic creation. And that realization is the beginning of a completely different life. Now here's another layer most people overlook. Assets are built on value, real value, not noise, not shortcuts, not empty trends, but something that genuinely helps, solves, improves. Because if there is no value, there is no sustainability. And if there is no sustainability, there is no asset. So the question becomes, what value can you create? What problems can you solve? What knowledge can you share? What systems can you design? That makes something easier for someone else, because that is where every asset begins, not with money, but with usefulness, with impact, with something that matters beyond you. And when you focus on that, you stop chasing income and start attracting it, because value creates demand, and demand creates opportunity, but only if you're consistent enough to stay in the game. Now let's pause for a moment and reflect, because this is important. If this idea is starting to shift something in your mind, if you're beginning to see your time differently, your effort differently, your potential differently, then take a second, commit to it, not to me, not to this audiobook, but to yourself. Because awareness without action changes nothing. And this is where most people fall back. They understand. They feel inspired, and then they return to old patterns, old routines, old thinking. But you're here for a reason. Something inside you is ready to build differently, to think differently, to live differently. So make a decision, quietly, personally, that you will not just listen, but apply. Because the next chapters are not just ideas, they are tools. And tools only matter if you use them. Now in Chapter 5, we go deeper into the foundation. Because before you build external assets, you must eliminate the internal resistance that stops most people. Doubt, distraction, lack of focus. Because the truth is, most people don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because they never develop the discipline to stay consistent long enough to build something real. And once you understand that, you realize the real battle was never outside. It was always within. Hey there, we want to remind you that we often choose topics suggested by you, our viewers, in the comments. In the comments, you can suggest a topic or ask a question about what you'd like to see in our video. We read every comment carefully, so we promise not to miss a single one. Thank you. Let's keep going. Chapter 5. The Discipline Barrier. There is a truth most people don't want to face, not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. You don't fail to build assets because you lack ideas. You don't fail because you lack potential. You fail because you stop. You stop when it gets boring. You stop when it feels slow. You stop when the results don't show up fast enough. And every time you stop, you reset the process. You go back to zero. That's the real cost of inconsistency. Not just lost time, but lost momentum. Because assets are not built in bursts. They are built in layers. Quiet layers, invisible layers, stacked over time. And discipline is what keeps those layers building, even when nothing seems to be happening. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think it's about intensity, about pushing harder, grinding longer, forcing motivation. But real discipline is quieter than that. It's simpler. It's showing up when you don't feel like it. It's continuing when no one is watching. It's building when there is no immediate reward. And that's why it's so rare. Because the world trains you to respond to feedback, likes, money, recognition, validation. But asset building often gives you none of that at the beginning. You work and nothing comes back. You create and no one responds. You build and it feels like it disappears into silence. And in that silence, most people quit. But that silence is not failure, it's the process. Because everything that compounds starts quietly, like water carving stone, drop by drop, invisible at first, unimpressive, easy to ignore, but over time, unstoppable. And this is where discipline becomes your edge, not because it makes you special, but because it makes you consistent. And consistency is what most people cannot maintain. They rely on motivation, and motivation is unstable. It comes and goes. It rises and falls. It depends on mood, energy, circumstance, but discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what needs to be done, and then it expects you to do it, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you'd rather do something else. This idea shows up again and again in performance psychology, that discipline is the ability to act despite resistance, not in the absence of it. And once you understand that, you stop waiting. You stop negotiating. You stop delaying. You simply act. Now here's where it gets deeper. Discipline is not just about action, it's about identity. Because every time you follow through, you reinforce something. You tell yourself, I am someone who finishes. I am someone who builds. I am someone who doesn't quit halfway. And that identity becomes your foundation. Because once you see yourself that way, your actions begin to align automatically. You no longer need to force everything. You become it. But if you keep stopping, keep delaying, keep quitting when it gets hard, you build a different identity. One that doubts, one that hesitates, one that starts, but never completes. And that identity will follow you into everything. So this is not just about building assets. This is about building yourself. Because the systems you create will never be stronger than the person creating them. Now let's talk about resistance, because you will feel it every single day. It will show up as distraction, scrolling, overthinking, busy work that feels productive, but avoids what actually matters. It will show up as excuses. I'll start tomorrow. I need more time. I need to learn more first. And every time you listen to those thoughts, you delay progress, not because you can't build, but because you didn't choose to. That's the difference. And this is where you need to be honest, brutally honest with yourself, because no one else can do this for you. Ask yourself, how many times have I delayed something important for something easy? How many times have I chosen comfort over growth? How many times have I started and not finished? Not to judge yourself, but to wake yourself up, because awareness is where change begins. And once you see the pattern, you can break it, but only if you decide to, because discipline is a decision, not a feeling, not a mood, a decision made daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute by minute, to do what matters instead of what's easy. Now here's the part most people don't expect. Discipline gets easier, not because the work changes, but because you change. At first, it feels forced, heavy, unnatural. But over time, it becomes familiar, automatic, part of who you are. And once that happens, everything accelerates, because now you're not fighting yourself, you're aligned, focused, consistent, and consistency builds momentum. Momentum builds results. Results build confidence, and confidence keeps you going. That's the cycle. But it only starts when you stop waiting and start doing, even in small ways, even imperfectly. even without certainty, because progress doesn't require perfection. It requires movement. So here's what I want you to do. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. Choose one thing, one small step, toward building your first asset. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be real. And then do it again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Because that's how it starts. Quietly, simply, but powerfully. And if this is resonating with you, if something inside you is shifting, make a small commitment right now. Not for anyone else, for yourself. Stay consistent. Stay focused. Stay in the process. Because what you're building is not just income, it's freedom. And freedom is always worth the effort. Now in Chapter 6, we take this even further, because discipline alone is not enough. You need direction, clarity, a clear path of what to build, and how to choose the right asset for you. Because not every path is the same, and choosing the wrong one can cost you years. But choosing the right one can change everything faster than you think. Chapter 6. Choosing the right asset path. There is a mistake that quietly steals years from people, not because they are lazy, not because they lack discipline, but because they choose the wrong direction. And the danger of the wrong direction is this: you can work hard, stay consistent, do everything right, and still end up building something that never truly frees you. That's why this chapter matters, because effort without direction is just motion, and motion without strategy leads nowhere. So before you build anything, you need to answer one question with absolute clarity. What kind of asset am I building, and why? Because not all assets are equal, not all paths fit you, and not all opportunities are worth your time. Now let's simplify this. There are 3 primary paths most people take when building assets in today's world: creation, distribution, and ownership. Each one is powerful. Each one can generate income, but each one requires a different approach, a different mindset, a different strength. Let's start with creation. This is where most people begin. You take something you know, and you turn it into something others can use. A course, a product, a system, a tool, something that solves a problem, something that provides value. This path is powerful because it starts with you, your knowledge, your skills, your experience. You don't need permission. You don't need a large audience. You just need clarity and consistency. But here's the challenge. Creation requires patience, because in the beginning, no one is watching, no one is buying, no one is responding, and that's where most people stop. But if you stay with it, if you refine, if you improve, if you continue to build, it compounds. Now the second path, distribution. This is where you focus on attention. You build an audience. You create content. You share ideas. You connect with people at scale. And over time, that attention becomes leverage. Because once people trust you, once they listen to you, once they follow you, you have influence. And influence is one of the most powerful assets in the modern world, because it allows you to direct attention to products, to ideas, to opportunities. But here's the truth. Distribution without value is empty. You can have attention, but if you don't offer something meaningful, it fades. So this path requires authenticity, consistency, and a deep understanding of what people actually need. Now the third path, ownership. This is where things shift, because ownership is not about creating or sharing, it's about controlling systems, businesses, investments, structures that generate value independently. This is where leverage becomes exponential. Because now, you're not just involved, you're in control. But this path often requires something more knowledge, more capital, more experience. So many people don't start here, they grow into it. Through creation, through distribution, through learning how systems work. And then they step into ownership. Now here's where you need to be honest with yourself. Which path fits you right now? Not in the future, not ideally, but realistically. Because choosing the right starting point matters more than choosing the perfect one. If you try to do everything at once, you'll dilute your focus. If you chase trends instead of alignment, you'll burn out. So simplify it. Choose one path, commit to it, and build. Because clarity creates momentum, and momentum creates results. Now let's go deeper, because choosing a path is only the beginning. You also need to understand your edge, your advantage, your unique position, because the biggest mistake people make is trying to build something that has nothing to do with them. They copy, they imitate, they follow what looks successful without asking if it fits. And that leads to frustration, because what works for someone else may not work for you. Different skills, different experiences, different strengths. So instead of asking, what is popular, ask, what am I naturally good at? What do I understand deeply? What problems have I already solved in my own life? Because those answers are where your first real asset begins, not in imitation, but in alignment. And this is where confidence starts to grow, because now you're not guessing. You're building from something real, something personal, something you can sustain. And sustainability is everything. Because building assets is not a sprint. It's a long game, a compounding game. And if you choose something that doesn't fit you, you won't stay with it long enough to see the results. Now here's another layer. You don't need to be the best. You don't need to be the smartest. You don't need to be the most experienced. You just need to be consistent. Because consistency beats talent. When talent is inconsistent, every single time. This principle shows up across every field. Those who stay focused and committed over time outperform those who rely only on bursts of effort. So don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait until you feel confident. Start where you are, with what you have, and build from there, because the path becomes clearer as you walk it. Now let's talk about speed, because in today's world, everything feels urgent, fast, immediate. You see people succeeding quickly, growing fast, scaling rapidly, and it creates pressure. It makes you feel like you're behind, like you need to catch up. But here's the truth. Speed without foundation is fragile. It looks impressive until it breaks. And when it breaks, you're back at zero. So don't chase speed, chase strength. Build something that lasts, something that holds, something that continues. Because real assets are not built overnight. They are built over time, with intention, with discipline, with clarity. And once they are built, they don't disappear. They grow, they evolve, they expand, and that's the goal. Not quick success, but lasting structure. Now pause for a moment and think. Which path are you choosing? Creation, distribution, ownership? There is no wrong answer, only the one you commit to. Because commitment is what turns ideas into reality, and reality is what creates results. So choose, decide, and begin. Because in Chapter 7, we go even deeper into execution. Because now that you've chosen your path, you need to understand how to structure your time so you can actually build it, not someday, not when things slow down, but now, inside the life you already have. Because the truth is, you don't need more time. You need to use your time differently. And once you learn how to do that, everything starts to change. Chapter 7, The Hour That Builds Your Future. Most people don't lack time. They lack intention. They wake up and the day takes them. Notifications, messages, responsibilities, noise, and before they realize it, the day is gone. Energy spent, attention scattered, nothing built. And then they say, I just don't have time. But the truth is different. You don't need more time. You need to reclaim it. Because hidden inside your day, there is an hour. Maybe early in the morning, maybe late at night, maybe between obligations. But it exists. And that hour is where your future is built. Not in massive leaps, not in perfect conditions, but in focused, consistent effort. Because 1 hour, used with intention, is more powerful than 10 hours used without it. This idea appears simple, but it changes everything. Because when you dedicate even a small, consistent window of time to building, you create momentum that compounds over weeks and months. Now imagine this, 1 hour a day, every day, focused, no distractions, no noise, just building. At the end of 1 week, you've invested 7 hours, 1 month, 30 hours, 1 year, 365 hours. That's not small. That's transformation. That's the difference between staying the same and becoming someone new. But here's where most people fail. They don't protect that hour. They treat it like optional time. Something they'll use if they feel like it. And that's why nothing changes. Because what's optional gets replaced. What's optional gets delayed. What's optional never becomes real. So this hour cannot be optional. It must become non-negotiable, a contract with yourself, not based on mood, not based on convenience, but based on commitment. Because this is where your asset is built, not in your job, not in your routine, but in this quiet, focused space, where you create something that doesn't disappear at the end of the day. Now let's make this practical. What do you actually do in this hour? You build, but not randomly, not chaotically, with direction. If you chose creation, you create something valuable. Content, products, systems. If you chose distribution, you build attention, share ideas, connect, refine your voice. If you chose ownership, you study, analyze, plan, structure. You move forward with intention every day, even if it feels small, even if progress seems slow, because consistency is what turns small actions into massive results. Now here's something important. Your environment matters. If your hour is filled with distractions, you lose its power. So you must protect it. Turn off notifications, close unnecessary tabs, create a space where focus is possible, because focus is your multiplier. It takes 1 hour and turns it into real output. Without focus, that same hour becomes noise, and noise builds nothing. Now let's talk about resistance, because it will show up here every day. When it's time to sit down, your mind will look for escape. Just check your phone. Just relax today. You can start tomorrow. And that voice is the same voice that has kept you stuck. So when it appears, recognize it. Don't fight it emotionally. Just act anyway. Sit down. Start, even if it feels uncomfortable, because starting is always the hardest part. But once you begin, momentum takes over, and momentum is what carries you forward. Now here's where this becomes powerful, After a few days, you feel a shift. After a few weeks, you see progress. After a few months, you build something real, something that didn't exist before, something that works, and that changes how you see yourself. You stop saying, "I want to build something," and start saying, "I am building something." That identity shift is everything, because once you see yourself as a builder, you don't stop. You refine, you improve, you expand, and this is where things accelerate, because now you're not relying on motivation. You've built a system, a routine, a structure that keeps moving forward even when you don't feel like it. Now pause for a moment and ask yourself, when is my hour? Not ideally, not someday, today. Where does it fit? Morning, before the world wakes up? Night, when everything slows down? Find it, claim it, protect it, because that hour is the difference between staying where you are and becoming who you could be. Now let's go deeper, because time alone is not enough. You also need energy, focus, mental clarity, and this is where most people struggle. They sit down to build, but their mind is scattered, distracted, pulled in different directions, and that's why Chapter 8 matters. Because before you can build effectively, you must learn how to control your mind, your attention, your thoughts. Because a distracted mind cannot build powerful systems, but a focused mind can create anything. And once you master that, you unlock a completely new level of performance. Chapter 8, Mastering Your Attention. There is a hidden cost most people never calculate, not in money, not in time, but in attention. Because where your attention goes, your life follows. And in a world designed to distract you, attention has become the most valuable currency you own. Yet most people give it away, freely, constantly, without realizing the price. They wake up and immediately reach for noise, notifications, feeds, endless scrolling, and before their day even begins, their mind is already fragmented, pulled in 10 different directions. And then they sit down to build something meaningful. But nothing comes together because a distracted mind cannot create focused output. This is the silent barrier, not lack of time, not lack of ability, but lack of control over attention. And if you don't fix this, you can have the best plan in the world and still produce nothing, because building assets requires depth, focus, sustained thought, the kind of thinking that doesn't happen when your mind is constantly interrupted. So this chapter is simple, but powerful. If you want to build something that lasts, you must learn to control what you focus on, not occasionally, but daily, because attention is like a lens. When it's scattered, everything is blurry. When it's focused, everything becomes clear, and clarity is what allows you to build. Now here's the truth most people ignore. Distraction is not accidental. It is engineered. Every platform, every app, every notification designed to capture you, to hold you, to keep you engaged, because your attention is profitable. But here's the question. If everyone else is benefiting from your attention, what are you building with it? Think about that. Every hour spent consuming is an hour not creating. Every moment lost in distraction is a moment not invested in your future. And over time, that adds up. Not just in lost hours, but in lost potential. Now this doesn't mean you eliminate everything. It means you become intentional. You choose where your attention goes. You decide what deserves your focus, and you remove what doesn't. Because focus is not about doing more. It's about doing less. with greater intensity. Now let's make this practical. When you enter your 1 hour of building, you protect it completely. No phone, no notifications, no interruptions, just you and the work. At first, this will feel uncomfortable. Your mind will look for escape. It will crave stimulation. It will try to pull you back into distraction, but stay. Sit with it, because that discomfort is your brain adjusting, relearning how to focus. And once it does, something powerful happens. Your thoughts become clearer. Your ideas become sharper. Your work becomes deeper. And you begin to produce at a different level. This is what high performers understand, not just how to work, but how to think. Because thinking is where everything begins. Every asset, every system, every idea starts in the mind. And if your mind is scattered, your results will be too. But if your mind is trained, focused, disciplined, there is almost nothing you cannot build. This is why mental training is essential, because your mind is either working for you or against you. And most people never take control of it. They let it react, respond, drift. And that leads to inconsistency. But when you train your mind, you create stability, clarity, direction. This principle is echoed in mental performance training, that a focused, controlled mind can operate effectively under any condition. And that's exactly what you need. Because building assets is not always easy. It requires patience, persistence, focus, and if your mind gives up at the first sign of difficulty, you'll never stay long enough to succeed. So you train it daily, not through theory, but through practice. Every time you choose focus over distraction, you strengthen it. Every time you stay present, you improve it. Every time you resist the urge to escape, you build control. And control is power. Now here's another layer. Your environment shapes your attention. If you surround yourself with noise, you become noisy. If you surround yourself with distraction, you become distracted. So you must design your environment. Create spaces that support focus. Remove what doesn't. Simplify, because complexity creates friction, and friction breaks consistency. Now think about this. What are the biggest distractions in your life right now? Be honest. Not what sounds good, what's real? Social media? Constant notifications? Unnecessary conversations? Endless content consumption? Identify them, not to judge yourself, but to take control. Because once you see them clearly, you can reduce them. And every reduction gives you more space, more clarity, more focus, and that space is where your best work happens. Now let's go deeper, because attention is not just about what you avoid. It's about what you choose, what you feed your mind, what you allow to influence your thinking, because your inputs shape your outputs. If you constantly consume noise, you produce confusion. If you consume clarity, you produce structure. So be intentional. Choose what you listen to. Choose what you read. Choose what you watch. Because over time, it becomes your thinking. And your thinking becomes your results. Now pause and ask yourself, am I in control of my attention, or is something else? Because that answer determines everything. And if you take control, even in small ways, you begin to shift. You begin to build differently. You begin to operate at a higher level. And that leads us to the next step. Because once your attention is focused and your time is structured, you're ready to build something real. But before you do, you must understand one more thing: value. Because assets are not built on effort alone. They are built on value. And in Chapter 9, we break down exactly what that means. Because if you understand value, you don't chase money anymore. You create it. If you enjoy these audiobooks and want to support the channel, consider joining our private members community. Members get early access to new audiobooks and exclusive wealth lessons. Chapter 9. Value is the real currency. Most people chase money. They think about it constantly. They worry about it. They measure their progress by it. But here's the truth that changes everything. Money is not the goal. Money is the result. And the thing that creates that result is value. If you misunderstand this, you will always feel like you're chasing, always trying to catch up, always wondering why your effort doesn't translate into income. But the moment you understand value, everything flips. Because now you're not asking, how do I make money? You're asking, how do I become useful? And usefulness is what creates demand. Demand creates opportunity. And opportunity creates income. That's the chain. That's the formula. And once you see it, you stop chasing outcomes and start focusing on inputs. Now let's define this clearly. Value is anything that improves someone's situation. It solves a problem, saves time, reduces effort, creates clarity, provides insight, or delivers a result people care about. That's it. Not hype, not noise, not empty content. Real, practical, meaningful improvement. And this is where most people go wrong. They try to build assets without building value first. They focus on monetization before usefulness. They ask, how can I sell this? Instead of asking, does this actually help? And because of that, nothing sticks, nothing grows, nothing compounds, because without value, there is nothing to sustain it. Now think about this. Every successful asset you've ever seen is built on value. A product that solves a problem, a platform that connects people, a system that makes something easier, even content, at its core, delivers value, information, inspiration, clarity, perspective, and the more valuable it is, the more it spreads, the more it grows, the more it compounds. So if you want to build something that pays you over time, you don't start with money, you start with value. Now here's where it gets deeper. Value is not about being perfect, it's about being useful. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be the best. You just need to know something that someone else doesn't, and be willing to share it, to structure it, to turn it into something repeatable. Because remember, a skill used once is income. A skill turned into a system is an asset. And that system is built on value. Now let's make this practical. Ask yourself, what problems have I solved in my own life? What have I learned that could help someone else? What do people already ask me for advice about? Because those answers are where your value begins. Not in theory, not in ideas, but in real experience, real understanding, real application. And this is important because people don't pay for information anymore. There's too much of it. They pay for clarity, for simplicity, for solutions. They pay for things that save them time or reduce their frustration. So don't just share what you know. Structure it, simplify it, make it usable, because usability is what turns knowledge into value. Now here's another layer. Value compounds. The more you create, the more you refine, the more you improve, the more valuable you become. And that growth is what creates leverage. Because now your output improves, your systems become stronger, your assets become more effective, and everything you build starts producing more. This is why consistency matters. Because every piece of value you create adds to the system. Every lesson learned improves the next one. Every step forward builds momentum, and over time, that momentum becomes powerful. Now, here's something most people overlook. Value requires empathy. You need to understand people, their struggles, their needs, their frustrations. Because if you don't understand the problem, you can't create the solution. So pay attention, listen, observe, not just to respond, but to understand. Because the better you understand people, the more precise your value becomes. And precision creates impact. Now let's pause, because this matters. If you're building something right now, ask yourself honestly, does this actually help someone? Does it solve a real problem? Does it create real improvement? If the answer is yes, you're on the right path. If the answer is unclear, refine it, adjust it, improve it. Because value is what determines everything. Now here's where things shift again. When you focus on value, you stop worrying about competition. Because you're not trying to be better than everyone. You're trying to be useful to someone. And that changes your energy, your approach, your mindset. Because now you're building with purpose, not pressure. And purpose is sustainable. Now let's connect this back to assets. An asset is not just something that pays you. It's something that continues to deliver value over time. That's why it works. That's why it grows. That's why it compounds. Because value doesn't expire if it's built correctly. So your goal is simple. Create something valuable. Structure it into a system. Allow it to operate independently and let it compound. That's the formula. Simple, but not easy. Because it requires consistency, discipline, focus. But once you commit to it, everything changes. Now imagine this. You build something valuable today. It helps someone. Tomorrow, it helps another. Next week, 10 more. Next month, 100. And you didn't recreate it each time. You built it once, and it continues. That's an asset. That's leverage. That's freedom. Now here's a moment for you. If this is starting to make sense, if you're beginning to see the connection, then take a second, lock it in. Because this is where most people drift. They understand, but they don't apply. So make it real. Think of one thing you can create, one piece of value, one step toward building something that lasts, and commit to it. Because this is where it begins, not in theory, but in action. Now in Chapter 10, we take this even further. Because once you understand value, you need to understand scale. How to take something small and expand it. Multiply it. Turn it into something that reaches beyond your immediate effort. Because building one asset is powerful. But learning how to scale it is where everything accelerates. And once you understand that, you stop thinking small and start thinking in systems. Chapter 10. From Effort to Scale. There is a moment in every builder's journey where something shifts again. You're no longer just creating. You're no longer just learning. You're no longer just experimenting. You start asking a different question. Not, how do I build this? But, how do I make this bigger without doing everything myself? That question is the doorway to scale. And scale is where assets truly come alive. Because building something once is powerful, but building something that grows, that multiplies, that expands beyond your direct input, that's where everything changes. Now here's the truth most people miss. Scale is not about doing more. It's about designing smarter. It's about taking what already works and allowing it to reach further, impact more, produce more, without requiring equal effort every time. Because if your effort increases at the same rate as your output, you're not scaling, you're just working harder. And that brings you back to the same trap. So let's break this down. Scaling begins with repetition. If something works once, you refine it. If it works again, you structure it. If it continues to work, you systemize it. And once it's systemized, you can expand it. This is how small ideas become large systems. Not through sudden breakthroughs, but through consistent refinement. Now think about this. You create something valuable. It helps one person, you improve it. Now it helps 10. You structure it. Now it helps 100. You systemize it. Now it helps thousands. Same core idea, different scale. That's not luck. That's design. Now here's where technology becomes your greatest ally. Because in today's world, you are no longer limited by location, or time, or physical presence. You can build once and distribute globally, instantly. And that is unprecedented. Because now, your potential reach is not local. It's global. But only if you design for scale. Now let's go deeper. What does it actually mean to design for scale? It means removing yourself from every step. Not completely, but strategically. You don't need to be involved in every interaction, every delivery, every transaction. Instead, you build systems that handle those things. Automation, processes, structures. And the more you refine those systems, the less dependent they become on you. That's the goal. Not to disappear entirely, but to reduce friction, to remove bottlenecks, to allow flow. Because bottlenecks are what limit growth. If everything depends on you, nothing can grow beyond you. But if your system can operate independently, it can expand infinitely. Now here's where most people hesitate. They think, I'm not ready for scale. I need to be bigger first. I need more experience. But that's backwards. You don't wait for scale. You build for it. From the beginning. Even in small ways. Even in simple systems. Because the habits you build early shape what you can build later. If you create everything manually, without structure, you create complexity. And complexity slows you down. But if you think in systems early, even small systems, you create clarity. And clarity accelerates growth. Now let's talk about mindset. Because scaling requires a shift. You stop thinking like a creator and start thinking like a designer. You stop asking, what do I need to do? And start asking, what needs to exist? That question changes everything. Because now, you're not just working inside the system, you're building it. And once you build it, you can improve it, optimize it, expand it. That's the game. Now here's another truth. Scale amplifies everything. If your system is strong, scale makes it powerful. If your system is weak, scale breaks it, so don't rush it. Build the foundation first. Make sure it works. Make sure it delivers value. Make sure it's consistent. Then scale it, because scaling something broken only creates bigger problems. But scaling something solid creates exponential growth. Now pause for a moment and reflect. What are you building right now? That could be scaled, not hypothetically, practically. What have you created that works, even in a small way? Because that's where you begin. Not from zero, but from proof, from something real. And once you have that, you expand it, step by step, layer by layer. Now here's where this becomes exciting, because once you understand scale, you realize something powerful. You realize that your effort doesn't have to stay small, that your ideas can grow beyond your immediate reach, that what you build today can impact people you will never meet. And that's not just about money. That's about impact, influence, legacy. Because assets don't just pay you. They extend you. They allow your work to exist beyond your direct presence. And that is powerful. Now let's connect this back to everything you've learned so far. You started with awareness. You understood the trap. You learned leverage. You shifted your identity. You defined assets. You built discipline. You chose your path. You structured your time. You mastered your attention. You created value. And now you understand scale. This is the foundation. This is the formula. But we're not done, because building and scaling assets is only one part of the journey. The next step is protection, because what you build must be sustained, maintained, strengthened. Otherwise, it fades. And in Chapter 11, we go deeper into that. Because building something once is powerful, but keeping it alive, keeping it growing, that's what creates lasting freedom. And once you understand how to do that, you don't just build assets, you build a life that supports them. Chapter 11, Protecting What You Build. There is a phase most people never reach, not because they can't build, but because they don't know how to sustain. They create something, it works, it starts to grow, and then it fades, slows down, breaks. Not because the idea was bad, but because the system was fragile. And this is where many people misunderstand the journey. They think success is about building. But real success is about maintaining and strengthening what you build. Because an asset that isn't protected eventually disappears. So this chapter is about something deeper. Not creation, not scaling, but preservation. Because what you build must be able to last. Now let's start with a simple truth. Every system degrades without attention. Every asset weakens without maintenance. Every structure fails without reinforcement. That's not failure, that's reality. So the goal is not to build something once and forget it. The goal is to build something and then support it intelligently. Now here's where most people go wrong. They either overattach or they completely detach. They either micromanage everything or they ignore it entirely, and both approaches create problems. Because assets need guidance, not constant control, not total neglect. Guidance, strategic attention, periodic refinement. This is how you keep something alive without becoming trapped inside it. Now think about this. When you build an asset, it starts as effort, then it becomes a system. But over time, that system interacts with the world. People change, needs evolve, technology shifts, and if your system doesn't adapt, it becomes outdated, and outdated systems lose value. So protection is not about holding something still. It's about allowing it to evolve, adjust, improve without losing its core function. That's the balance, stability and flexibility. Now here's something important. The stronger your foundation, the easier this becomes. If your asset is built on real value, it can adapt. If it's built on trends, it fades. That's why Chapter 9 mattered so much. Because value is not just what creates assets, it's what sustains them. Now let's go deeper. Protection also means boundaries, knowing what not to do. Because as your asset grows, so do distractions, opportunities, requests. And not all of them are aligned. Not all of them support what you've built. So you must be selective. You must protect your time, your energy, your focus. Because if you say yes to everything, you weaken your system. But if you choose carefully, you strengthen it. This is where discipline evolves It's no longer just about showing up. It's about choosing what deserves your attention, because your attention is still your most valuable resource. Now let's talk about burnout, because this is where many builders fall. They build, they push, they scale, and then they exhaust themselves because they never transition from effort to structure. They stay involved in everything, every detail, every decision, and over time, that becomes unsustainable. So protection also means delegation, automation, simplification, removing yourself from what doesn't require you so you can focus on what does. Because your role changes. You are no longer just the builder. You are the designer, the strategist, the one who ensures the system continues without being consumed by it. Now here's a powerful shift. When you protect your assets correctly, they begin to protect you. They provide stability, consistency, security. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but far more stable than relying only on your time. And that's the goal. Not control over everything, but resilience. Because life will change. Unexpected things will happen. Your energy will fluctuate. Your focus will shift. And when that happens, your assets should still function, still produce, still support you. That's real freedom, not having to start from zero every time something changes. Now pause for a moment and reflect. What are you building right now that needs protection? Not later, now. What systems need refinement? What processes need simplification? What areas require less of you and more structure? Because identifying that early saves you time later. Now here's another layer. Protection also means mindset. Because as things grow, fear appears. Fear of losing what you built, fear of failure, fear of change. And if you let that fear control you, you stop evolving, you stop improving, you become rigid, and rigidity leads to collapse. So you must stay adaptable, open, willing to adjust, because growth requires change, and change requires courage. Now let's connect this back to your journey. You are not just building assets. You are building a life, a system of systems, where your time, your energy, your effort are used intentionally. And when you protect that system, everything becomes more stable, more predictable, more aligned. And that's powerful, because now you're not reacting to life, you're designing it. Now here's something to remember. You don't need to protect everything perfectly. You just need to be aware, present, intentional, because small adjustments made consistently prevent big problems later, and that's how you sustain growth. Now we move forward, because once your assets are protected, once they are stable, once they are functioning, you unlock something new, choice. And in Chapter 12, we explore what that means, because the real goal of building assets is not just income, it's freedom of choice. How you spend your time, where you focus your energy, what you decide to build next. And once you reach that point, you realize something powerful. You are no longer trapped in the system. You are creating it. Dear friend, you are definitely on the right track if you are watching this video. Like, subscribe, and write in the comments which topic or problem concerns you the most. We promise to prepare a professional video explanation at your request. Chapter 12, The Power of Choice. There is a moment. It doesn't arrive with noise, no announcement, no dramatic shift, just a quiet realization that something is different. You wake up, and for the first time, you're not thinking about what you have to do. You're thinking about what you choose to do. And that moment is the true return on everything you've been building. Because the real purpose of assets was never just money, it was choice. The ability to decide how your time is spent, where your energy goes, what your life looks like on a daily basis. Most people never experience this, not because it's impossible, but because they never build the systems that allow it. They stay inside the cycle, wake up, work, repeat. And even when they succeed, even when they earn more, their time is still controlled, still scheduled, still dependent. But when you build assets, when you create systems that operate beyond you, you begin to loosen that dependency, not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. And in that gradual shift, freedom appears. Now here's where it gets real. Freedom is not about doing nothing. It's not about escaping responsibility. It's about alignment, doing what matters, focusing on what you value, choosing your direction instead of reacting to it. And that's a completely different way to live, because now you're not forced into every decision. You have options. You can say no. You can step back. You can redirect. And those small choices create a completely different life. Now let's go deeper. Choice requires responsibility. Because once you have it, you can't blame the system anymore. You can't say, I have no time. I have no options. Because now you've built them. And that's where growth continues. Because freedom without discipline becomes chaos. But freedom with discipline becomes power. You choose what to build next. You choose what to improve. You choose how to expand. And that's where life becomes intentional, not reactive. Now here's something most people don't expect. When you gain more freedom, your standards must rise. Because without structure, you drift. You lose focus. You waste time. And that brings you back to where you started. So you must stay grounded, stay disciplined, stay clear, because freedom is not the end. It's the next level. Now think about this. If you had full control over your time, what would you do? Not what sounds good, not what impresses others. What actually matters to you? Would you build more, learn more, create more, spend time differently? Because that answer is your direction, and assets are what allow you to move toward it. Now here's a powerful shift. When you stop chasing money and start building assets, you don't just gain income, you gain perspective. You start seeing life differently. You stop rushing. You stop reacting. You start thinking long-term, strategically. And that changes your decisions, because now you're not asking, what do I need today? You're asking, what will matter in 5 years? And that question transforms everything. Now let's connect this back to your journey. You started with awareness. You saw the trap. You learned leverage. You shifted your identity. You built discipline. You chose your path. You structured your time. You mastered your attention. You created value. You scaled. You protected. And now you have choice. But we're not finished, because choice leads to something even deeper. Purpose. Because once you're no longer controlled by survival, you start asking different questions. Why am I building? What impact do I want to create? What kind of life do I actually want? And those questions lead to clarity, not just in business, but in life. And that's where everything aligns. Now pause for a moment, because this matters. If you've been following this journey, if you've been reflecting, if something inside you is shifting, then take a second, acknowledge it, because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments like this, moments of awareness, moments of clarity, moments where you decide to think differently, to act differently, to build differently, and those moments compound, just like assets. Now here's something I want you to do, not later, now. Think about one choice you've been avoiding, something you know you need to do, but haven't. Maybe it's starting, maybe it's committing, maybe it's letting go of something that no longer serves you. Whatever it is, make the decision, because choice only matters when it leads to action, and action is what moves everything forward. Now we move into chapter 13, because once you have choice, once you have direction, you must learn how to sustain momentum. Because starting is one thing, continuing is everything, and most people don't fail at starting, they fail at staying. But if you can master that, if you can stay consistent over time, there is almost nothing you cannot build. Chapter 13, the momentum principle. Starting is exciting. There's energy, clarity, a sense of movement. You feel like something has begun. But momentum is not built in the start. It's built in the continuation, in the days when it's quiet, in the moments when nothing feels like it's working, in the stretches where progress is invisible. That's where momentum is either created or destroyed. Because here's the truth most people never accept. Consistency is not tested when you feel good. It's tested when you don't. When motivation disappears, when distractions increase, when doubt starts to speak louder than your vision, that's when most people slow down, skip a day, delay a task, break the pattern, and once the pattern breaks, momentum disappears. Not all at once, but gradually, until what once felt like progress becomes another abandoned attempt. And that's the cycle you must break, not by doing more, but by staying, by continuing, by refusing to reset every time it gets uncomfortable. Because momentum is not built on intensity, it's built on repetition, small actions, repeated consistently, over time. That's what creates movement. That's what creates results. That's what builds assets. Now think about this. If you build for 3 days and stop for 4, you're not building, you're restarting. If you build for 1 week and disappear for 2, you're not progressing, you're pausing, and every pause costs you momentum. Because momentum thrives on continuity, on rhythm, on flow. So your goal is simple. Don't break the chain, not because every day will be perfect, but because every day matters. Even the small ones, especially the small ones, because those are the days that test your commitment. Now here's something important. Momentum doesn't require massive effort. It requires consistent effort. There will be days where you feel strong, focused, productive, and you'll make big progress. But there will also be days where everything feels heavy, slow, unclear. And on those days, your only job is to show up. Even if it's 30 minutes, even if it's one small task, even if it feels insignificant. Because showing up maintains the chain. And maintaining the chain builds momentum. Now let's go deeper. Momentum is not just physical, it's mental. Every time you follow through, you reinforce your identity. You tell yourself, I keep going. I don't stop halfway. I finish what I start. And that belief becomes your foundation. Because once you believe that about yourself, your actions align with it. You don't need to force consistency. You become consistent. But if you keep stopping, keep delaying, keep breaking your own commitments, you build the opposite belief. I always fall off. I never stay consistent. I start strong but don't finish. And that belief becomes your limitation. So this is not just about building assets. This is about building trust with yourself. Because if you don't trust yourself to follow through, nothing you build will feel stable. But if you do, everything becomes easier. Now here's a powerful shift. Instead of focusing on outcomes, focus on streaks. How many days in a row can you show up? Not perfectly, not intensely, just consistently, because streaks create rhythm, and rhythm creates momentum. Now let's talk about recovery, because you will miss a day. You will have moments where things don't go as planned. That's normal. That's human. But the difference is what you do next. Most people miss one day and turn it into a week, a month, a restart. But builders recover quickly. They don't dwell. They don't overthink. They simply return. The next day, the next moment, the next opportunity. Because momentum is not about perfection. It's about resilience. The ability to keep going, even after disruption. Now think about this. What if you didn't stop this time? What if you stayed consistent for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What would you build? What would change? Because most people never find out. They stop too early. They reset too often. They never reach the point where momentum takes over. And that point is where everything becomes easier. Because now you're not forcing progress. You're riding it. You're inside it. And that's powerful. Now let's connect this back to your asset. Every day you show up, you add to it. Every day you stay consistent, you strengthen it. Every day you continue, you move closer to something real, something that works, something that lasts. And one day, you'll look back and realize it wasn't one big moment that changed everything. It was the accumulation, the repetition, the consistency. That's the formula. Simple, but rare. Now here's a moment for you. If you've been starting and stopping, if you've been building in bursts, if you've been resetting too often, make a decision right now to stay, to continue, to build without interruption. Because this time, you're not chasing motivation, you're building momentum, and momentum changes everything. Now we move forward, because once momentum is established, you unlock something even more powerful. Acceleration. And in Chapter 14, we explore how to use that momentum to grow faster, smarter, more effectively, without losing control, because growth without structure leads to chaos. But growth with intention leads to expansion. And that's where your assets begin to truly evolve. Chapter 14, Acceleration without collapse. Momentum is powerful. It carries you, builds rhythm, creates progress. But momentum alone is not enough. Because there comes a point where things begin to move faster. Opportunities appear, results start showing, your system begins to respond. And suddenly, you're no longer pushing everything uphill, you're moving with speed. That's acceleration. And this is where many people lose control. Not at the beginning, but right here. Because growth introduces pressure, more decisions, more options, more complexity. And if you're not prepared for it, what you built with discipline can collapse under expansion. So this chapter is about control, not slowing down your growth, but guiding it. Because acceleration without structure leads to chaos, but acceleration with intention leads to expansion. Now let's start with a simple truth. Growth magnifies everything. If your system is clear, growth makes it stronger. If your system is messy, growth exposes every weakness. So the first step in acceleration is simplification, not adding more, but refining what already works. Because the more you grow, the more important clarity becomes. Now think about this. If something is working, your instinct might be to do more of everything, more ideas, more projects, more directions. But that creates fragmentation, and fragmentation breaks focus. Instead, you double down, you refine, you improve the core. Because scale is not about expansion in every direction, it's about depth in the right direction. Now here's where discipline evolves again. At the beginning, discipline is about showing up. Now, it's about choosing wisely. Because you will have more opportunities, more paths, more options than before. And not all of them are aligned. Not all of them support your long-term vision. So you must filter. You must ask, does this strengthen what I'm building or distract from it? And if the answer is unclear, you don't move, because movement without alignment creates confusion. Now let's talk about energy, because acceleration requires it. Not just time, not just effort, but mental clarity, focus, stability. And this is where many people burn out. They try to match growth with constant output. They push harder, work longer, do more, and eventually they exhaust themselves because they never transition from doing everything to designing better systems. So here's the shift. You stop asking, how can I do more? And start asking, how can this work with less effort from me? That question protects your energy, and your energy determines your sustainability, because if you burn out, everything stops. But if you design for efficiency, everything continues. Now here's a powerful idea. Acceleration should feel controlled, not overwhelming, not chaotic, but structured, like a system that grows without breaking. And that only happens when you stay intentional. Now let's go deeper, because growth introduces pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to maintain results, pressure to keep up. And if you let that pressure control you, you lose clarity. You start reacting instead of leading. So you must stay grounded. Return to your principles. Value, consistency, focus. Because those are what built your system in the first place. And they are what will sustain it. Now here's something important. You don't need to take every opportunity. You don't need to say yes to everything. You don't need to expand in every direction. Because growth is not about doing more. It's about doing what matters at a higher level. So be selective, be intentional, be disciplined, because that's what keeps your system strong. Now pause for a moment and reflect. If things started moving faster in your life right now, would your system hold or would it break? Would you stay focused or become overwhelmed? Because the answer to that question determines how far you can go. Now, here's the shift. You prepare for growth before it happens. You simplify, you structure, you refine. So when acceleration comes, you're ready. And when you're ready, you don't just grow, you expand with control. Now let's connect this back to your journey. You've built awareness, discipline, focus, value, momentum, and now you're learning how to handle growth. This is where things become real, because this is where most people lose consistency, lose clarity, lose direction. But if you stay grounded, if you stay intentional, if you keep refining instead of reacting, you move forward with strength. And that leads us to the next level, because once you can handle growth, you begin to think differently again. You stop focusing only on building and start thinking about multiplying. And in Chapter 15, we explore how to turn one asset into multiple streams, multiple systems, multiple sources of value. Because the real power of the asset formula is not just in building one thing, it's in creating a network of systems that support each other. And once you understand that, you stop building in isolation and start building ecosystems. Chapter 15. Building an ecosystem, not just an asset. Most people think too small, not because they lack ambition, but because they only see one step at a time. They build one thing, focus on one outcome, chase one stream of income. And while that can work, it keeps them limited, because the real power of the asset formula is not in building one asset. It's in building systems that connect, support, and multiply each other. This is where your thinking expands again. You stop asking, how do I build something that pays me? And start asking, how do I build multiple things that work together? That question is the beginning of an ecosystem. Now let's break this down. An ecosystem is not random. It's intentional. Each part has a role. Each piece connects. Each system supports the others. And together, they create something stronger than any single asset alone. Now imagine this. You create content. That content builds attention. That attention leads to your product. That product delivers value. That value builds trust. That trust brings people back. And the cycle continues. That's not one asset. That's a system, a loop, an ecosystem. And once it's working, it becomes powerful. Because now, you're not relying on one source, one stream, one point of failure. You've built structure, redundancy, strength. Now here's the shift. You don't build everything at once. You build one piece, and then you connect another, then another, step by step, layer by layer, because trying to build everything at once leads to overwhelm. But building intentionally creates clarity. Now let's go deeper. Every ecosystem has a foundation, your core asset, the thing that everything else connects to. This could be your knowledge, your product, your platform, your system, something central, something valuable, something consistent. And once that foundation is strong, you expand. You add layers, support systems, extensions, amplifiers, because the goal is not complexity, it's connection. Each part should make the others stronger. Now here's something important. An ecosystem increases stability, because if one part slows down, the others continue. If one stream weakens, the others support. And that's how you protect your income, your growth, your progress. Not by relying on one thing, but by building multiple connected systems. Now let's talk about growth, because ecosystems grow differently. They don't rely on linear progress. They compound. Each part feeds into the next. Each system amplifies the others. And over time, that creates exponential growth, not sudden, not overnight, but powerful. Now here's where most people hesitate. They think, this is too complex. This is too big. I'm not ready. But remember, you don't start with the ecosystem, you grow into it. One asset, then another, then connections, then structure, and over time, it forms naturally, organically, powerfully. Now here's a key mindset shift. Stop thinking in isolated actions. Start thinking in systems. Everything you build should have a purpose beyond itself. How does it connect? How does it support? How does it grow with everything else? Because when you think this way, you build smarter, you build stronger, you build with intention. Now let's pause and reflect. What are you building right now? And how could it connect to something else? Not randomly, strategically. Because even small connections create leverage, and leverage creates growth. Now here's another layer. Ecosystems require vision. You need to see beyond the immediate, beyond the current step. You need to think long term, because what you build today should support what you build tomorrow. And that requires clarity, direction, purpose. Now let's bring this back to you. You are not just building income. You are building a system, a structure, a network of value. And the more intentional you are, the stronger it becomes. Now here's something powerful. When your ecosystem is working, you don't feel pressure the same way. You don't rely on one outcome. You don't depend on one result. You operate with stability, confidence, control. And that changes how you think, how you act, how you build. Now imagine this. Multiple streams, multiple systems, all connected, all working, all producing. That's not luck. That's design. That's the asset formula. Now here's your moment. If this is starting to expand your thinking, if you're beginning to see beyond just one idea, then take a second and ask yourself, what am I building that could become part of something bigger? Because that question is where ecosystems begin. Now we move forward, because once you understand ecosystems, you begin to think even bigger, not just about systems, but about identity. Because the person who builds one asset is not the same as the person who builds an ecosystem. And in chapter 16, we step into that identity, because once you become that person, everything you build changes, and everything you touch has the potential to grow. Chapter 16, Becoming the System. At the beginning, you build something, an idea, a small system, a single asset, and it feels external, separate from you, something you're working on, something you're trying to grow. But there comes a moment where that changes, where building is no longer something you do. It becomes something you are. And that shift is what separates those who occasionally succeed from those who build continuously. Because once you become the system, you don't need to search for opportunities. You create them. You don't need to force consistency. You operate from it. You don't need to ask what to build next. You see it everywhere. Now here's the truth. Identity drives everything, not your goals, not your plans, not your intentions, your identity. Because your identity determines your actions, and your actions determine your results. So if you still see yourself as someone trying to build, trying to stay consistent, trying to figure things out, you will always operate with hesitation, with doubt, with inconsistency. But when you shift, when you see yourself as a builder, an architect, a system creator, everything changes. Because now, you don't ask if you should show up. You do. You don't question whether you can build. You build. You don't wait for clarity. You create it through action. And that identity becomes your foundation. Now let's go deeper. Becoming the system means this. You no longer rely on external structure. You are the structure. Your habits are aligned. Your thinking is intentional. Your time is directed. Your focus is controlled. You don't need constant motivation, because you've built internal discipline, and that discipline carries you forward. Now here's where most people get stuck. They wait to feel like this person. They wait for confidence, for certainty, for proof. But identity doesn't come first. Action does. You act like the builder before you fully believe it. You show up like the architect before you feel like one. And over time, through repetition, through consistency, through proof, that identity becomes real. Now here's something powerful. Once you become the system, you don't just build assets. You build continuously. You improve automatically. You refine naturally. Because it's no longer forced. It's integrated. Now think about this. A person who sees themselves as inconsistent will always find reasons to stop. But a person who sees themselves as disciplined will always find a way to continue. Same situation, different identity, different outcome. So the question becomes, who are you becoming? Not who you want to be, not who you imagine, but who you are building yourself into through your daily actions. Because every decision, every habit, every hour you use intentionally is shaping that identity. Now here's where this connects to everything. When you become the system, you don't rely on one asset. You build many. You don't rely on one opportunity. You create them. You don't rely on external stability. You generate your own. And that's where real power comes from. Not control over everything, but the ability to build again and again. Now here's a shift most people don't expect. When you reach this level, you stop chasing results. You focus on process because you trust it. You've seen it work. You've experienced the compounding. So you don't rush. You don't panic. You build. And you let time do its work. Now let's pause. Because this matters. If you've been following this journey, if you've been applying even small parts of it, then something inside you is already changing. You're thinking differently, seeing differently, questioning differently, and that's the beginning. Because identity shifts don't happen all at once. They happen gradually, through awareness, through action, through repetition. Now here's your moment. Ask yourself honestly, am I acting like the person I want to become? Not occasionally, not when it's easy, consistently. Because that answer is where your next level begins. Now let's take this further, because once you become the system, you unlock something even more powerful. Vision. Not just short-term goals, but long-term direction. Clarity about where you're going and why. And in Chapter 17, we step into that vision. Because building without direction leads to confusion. But building with vision leads to purpose. And purpose is what sustains everything you create. Chapter 17. Vision that outlives effort. There is a difference between building and knowing why you're building. At first, you move out of necessity. You want more freedom, more control, more stability. You're trying to escape the cycle, and that's enough to start. But it's not enough to sustain. Because eventually, you reach a point where survival is no longer your driver. You've built something. You've created momentum. You've gained control. And now, a deeper question appears. What is all of this for? That question is where vision begins. Because vision is not about what you want next week. It's about what you are building toward over years, over time, beyond immediate results. And without vision, you drift, even with assets, even with income, even with freedom. You drift because direction is unclear, purpose is undefined. And when that happens, you lose intensity, you lose focus, you lose meaning. But when you have vision, everything aligns, every action connects, every system has purpose, every decision becomes clearer. Because now, you're not just building randomly, you're building intentionally. Now let's make this real. Vision is not something you copy. It's not something you borrow. It's something you define, based on what matters to you, not what looks impressive, not what others expect, but what actually aligns with your values, your priorities, your direction. And that requires honesty, because it's easy to chase what looks successful, but it's harder to build what feels meaningful. Now here's the truth. If your vision is unclear, your systems will be scattered. If your vision is strong, your systems will align, because everything you build should support where you're going. Now think about this. If you continue exactly as you are, building what you're building, where does it lead? Not in a month, not in a year, 5 years, 10 years. What does your life look like? Because that answer is your trajectory. And if that trajectory doesn't feel right, you adjust, not by stopping everything, but by refining direction. Now here's where most people struggle. They think vision has to be perfect, clear, fully defined, but it doesn't. It just needs to be directionally true. Something you can move toward, something you can refine over time, because clarity comes through movement, not waiting. Now let's go deeper. Vision creates filters. It helps you decide what to say yes to and what to ignore. Because without vision, everything looks like an opportunity. But with vision, you see clearly. You know what aligns and what doesn't. And that protects your time, your energy, your focus. Now here's something powerful. Vision creates patience, because you're not chasing immediate results. You're building something long-term, and that changes your mindset. You stop rushing. You stop reacting. You start thinking strategically, and that's where real growth happens. Now before we close, take a second, breathe, and reflect. What is one thing you will build? One system, one asset, one step. Because that's all it takes to begin. And beginning is the hardest part. But once you start, you're no longer the same. You're no longer just thinking. You're building. Now here's something I want you to do. If this audiobook spoke to you, if something shifted, leave a comment with one word. Building. Not for anyone else, but as a commitment to yourself. A signal that you're stepping into this. And if you know someone stuck in that cycle, someone who feels like they're repeating the same day over and over, share this with them. Because sometimes one idea at the right time changes everything. And if you want to stay consistent, to keep learning, to keep building, then subscribe, not for content, but for accountability. Because growth is not a moment, it's a pattern, and patterns are what shape your life. Now, as this audiobook comes to a close, remember this one line. Let it stay with you. Let it guide you. Let it remind you. When things feel slow, when progress feels invisible, when discipline feels heavy, an hour invested builds a future that no one can take from you. And once you understand that, once you live that, once you build with that in mind, you don't just create assets. You create a life that pays you back for the rest of your life.